Let's hear from my guests of the day, Alan Meban and Chris Donnelly. Welcome to you both. Chris, I'm not sure whether we should take it a day at a time, a week at a time, a fortnight at a time. How do you see things unfolding in whatever specified period you'd like to pick?
I think if Theresa May is to pull this off from this point forward, it will represent a remarkable transformation in her political fortunes. There is no sign of that happening. In fact, all the indications are that things are moving in the opposite direction. We had yet another minister resigning from the government, bringing to 6 over the course of the last month over the weekend. We have now Labour and the other opposition parties moving on this issue of trying to seek to pressurise Theresa May to publish the advice from the Attorney-General with regard to the Brexit backstop issue.
Do you think that would make any difference if it was published? It's only going to tell us what we already know, is it not?
I think you're right, but I also think that what it does, it continues to put Theresa May on the defensive. It puts her on the back foot at a time when she knows she needs, this is the final week, this is the final throw of the dice. And even in the discussion you had there with the correspondent, you know, what happens after the deal gets voted down, as looks likely? I think that there might be a consensus within Westminster that the British government, whether it's led by Theresa May or someone else, could go to Europe and Brussels and try to wring further concessions. But what's the incentive from the European perspective in that? You know, Theresa May negotiated a deal, a painstaking deal, and yet couldn't sell it. So why on earth would they re-enter negotiations when we could end up in this scenario again?
Alan, no one seems to believe Theresa May's got the numbers to get her deal through Parliament on Tuesday week, but she still doggedly ploughs on. Do you think she has a plan B?
I suspect she has many plan Bs, but she can't choose which one. I think it was very interesting to see that she started this kind of so-called propaganda tour when she's actually trying to speak to the public. Now, the public have no say at the moment, and we could put pressure on MPs, but actually...
Put pressure on constituency associations, maybe, to bring Tory MPs into line?
Potentially, but why did she start in Northern Ireland? We're a lost cause. You know, she knows how we stand. She knows the remarkable politics and the complexity with the DUP involvement.
Maybe she wants to bring the DUP into line. I
don't think she was going to achieve that. If anything, she's going to disappoint the public over here that she wasn't convening all-party talks or doing something about our nearly 2 years of no government. So I think actually she's talking to the public for one of two reasons. Either she thinks that the second referendum will happen and that it will be important to start that work now, or she thinks there's going to be a general election. Those are the only two ways that the public can really do anything to do much about the arithmetic in Parliament. Neither of those things really there is time for. Both of those things would require the EU to give a bit more space, and that is precisely what those who want to leave Europe do not want to see, which is the EU having more power over Britain and where it's going with Brexit.
And Chris, there is some speculation, I think it's the Sunday Times today, suggesting that maybe what Theresa May wants is a snap general election. She fancies her chances.
That could be the case. I think what she really needs at this point are opinion polls showing the general public moving decisively in her favour. I think that is what she's relying on. That's also why I think she's in favour of a head-to-head debate with Jeremy Corbyn. The difficulty for her is that there doesn't appear to be that movement at ground level. She would also, you know, this week, if she heard from more business voices saying that in the event of this withdrawal agreement not going through, there could be a loss of jobs. You know, this Project Fear probably would suit her at the moment. It's not happening, and the days are running out for her.
Alan, what do you make of the prospect of a big TV debate on the night of the Strictly results, I think next Sunday night, and of course I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here?
I'm not sure that the debate will achieve much. I think we're at the point where actually it's been debated every day. We were kind of newspaper front pages, you know, you wouldn't sell a paper if it didn't have Brexit in the front of it these days. So I'm not sure we're going to learn much more, except we may realise that Theresa May doesn't like debates. We may realise that Jeremy Corbyn doesn't like debates either. And that's kind of something that we already know. We're trying to get a binary option amongst, we've probably got at least 4 different kind of paths that we could go down here. And we're trying to get it down to 2 in all these debates, all these referendums, all these votes. And that's really not going to work.
It's not a binary vote. It's not a binary issue. That's the point. Yeah. It's not a binary debate, Chris.
No, and part of the difficulty there is a lot of the MPs at Westminster are looking in different directions. Some want a second vote. Some are in favour of actually Remain. Some want a harder Brexit. Some want a softer Brexit. And the difficulty that Theresa May has, she hasn't been able to convince people that it should just be binary at this stage, that it needs to be either go for her deal or a no deal. People aren't at that position yet.
And if you were to have a second referendum, the polling so far is not particularly bright for those who think that it would actually reverse the decision. So you're not even certain that that would give another way out of this. It's kind of like the UK has grabbed Alice's hand and jumped into the rabbit hole, and we're now in this kind of surreal Brexit world, and actually we can't find the way home.
There is a view that until Brexit is concluded, and perhaps until RHI has been sorted out, we're not going to see the return of Stormont. Is that right in your view?
Oh, I think so. I think we're going to have to settle in with what we have at the moment. I think one of the interesting focuses on that report, again, was this developing consensus, perhaps, that some form, when we get to that point, some form of external mediation is going to be required to jumpstart talks once again, to get a focus. The one big obstacle that seems to be the position of the DUP. They are opposed to that. You know, famously, American intervention did work with George Mitchell during the time of the Good Friday Agreement. Didn't work a number of years ago when Richard Haas and Megan O'Sullivan were over here. And I think it's the DUP's experience of that. When those individuals, you know, came forward with their own proposal, the DUP very much shouldered the blame for rejecting it. And I think that's why the DUP are loath to go in that direction. They prefer to situate the line they have, which is that the British government, as sovereign authority here, should be chairing talks.
Alan, to be honest, John Kerry may have bigger fish to fry. His name is still in the hat, apparently, to run against Trump in a couple of years' time for the White House. So you imagine he'd go for that option rather than chairing talks, the kiss of death, chairing talks in Northern Ireland. Stephen Walker was quite persistent there, but he wasn't having any of it.
He would make a good recruiting sergeant, but I don't think a kind of a former war veteran is going to actually want to join the purely political fray here and step into that and try and fix it. If he has any conversations with Richard Haas and Megan O'Sullivan, he's going to say, you know, stay well clear. I think George Mitchell worked with. George Mitchell was a rather special person and was at a time in his career and had an empathy that, and a long-term connection. He wasn't just coming in to do the talks. He actually kind of loved the place or fell in love with the place, and that, I think, really helped. I don't think so. We need somebody very special if we do bring in somebody external. I suspect we'll have to, though, because the parties themselves cannot co-organise. I do not see the DUP, who claim to have no red lines about kind of going back into the executive. They say they want the executive, but they clearly don't want it now, because there's no stunt, there's no sitting up in Parliament buildings every day with an open office saying, you know, come and talk to us. So they're hedging their bets and they're basically trying to make Sinn Féin look bad, but actually they themselves are not doing anything to make it happen.
And you imagine, Chris, that unionists in particular won't like what he said there regarding Brexit and the Troubles. I mean, this idea that Brexit could... or it's imperative, just to quote him, that Brexit's solved in a way that does not reignite the Troubles. He doesn't want to reheat the passions of the past in Northern Ireland. That's the kind of language unionists don't feel comfortable with.
I think you're right. I think it's also echoes perhaps the line that Leo Varadkar perhaps and Simon Coveney have been using over the last year, at least in terms of what their primary focus in the Brexit negotiations, their argument in terms of trying to secure a backstop, a fixed backstop. It's also the case, I think, that, you know, talking about reheated passions have been reheated not just because of Brexit in recent years, also the nature in which Stormont collapsed, the election results and the reality of the demographic changes that exist in Northern Ireland. So we are where we are, but I do think it's important also to point that no one is really talking about violence returning as a result of this. Yes, people have become more polarised, but we are nowhere near the point at which there's a real fear that violence could be reignited.
Just a word, because we've got time to discuss Peter Robinson's intervention. He was at that conference at Yale. He was one of the speakers reflecting on what happened 20 years ago. It seemed his comments in Belfast 10 days ago or thereabouts were a thinly veiled criticism of his successor, Arlene Foster. When Stephen Walker spoke to him for The View on Thursday night, he said nothing could be further from the truth. How do you read that?
I think I go back to where some of Robinson's comments were originally made, which was at Knock Methodist at a kind of not a public meeting, but something that was kind of reasonably low key, but was attended by a journalist who was able to kind of report the stuff. So in a sense, he was talking off the cuff, but he's a senior politician, so he knows that if Brian Rowan's sitting in the room,
he knew it would be reported. There's no doubt about that.
I think, in a sense, I put it down to backseat driving. I think he is frustrated. I think he realises that unionism at the moment is kind of flailing around all over the place. I think he realises that he has a position as a kind of a senior statesman, and he has, to be honest, become a bit more statesman-like since he stopped being First Minister, in my view. There's things about the past of it like to change and challenge, but actually he's been relatively kind of steady in the recent times. But I think he's putting stuff out there that he knows that unionism needs to talk about, and it's uncomfortable, and it's clearly uncomfortable for Arlene Foster, and I would say that is why he then kind of rolled back with something that nobody believes, the fact that he's blaming the media for reporting what he's actually putting out there.
Yeah, well, some people might say it's Peter Robinson speaking out of both sides of his mouth. Some people will like it, some people will be frustrated by it. It's interesting nonetheless. Gives us something to discuss. Thank you both very much indeed.